Matt, would you please tell us about this artwork that you've done? I mean, the style is kind of a sculpture and painting together. How did you come upon doing this kind of three-dimensional painting, and what do you actually call this type of art?
Well, I don't call it. I once asked my grandmother what they called it in Yiddish, and she said in Yiddish they don't call it, they just do it. And that's kind of the way it is. I started working with shaped canvases by simply discovering some shaped canvases in Florence, Italy, where I was teaching. And there was a stack of them in a paint store. And these were portrait canvases. And they were perfect ovals. And it was presumed that the painter would paint a face in the middle of one of them, and the rest would be background. But you've seen my tribal stuff, and you know that I'm very into masks. So for me, the whole canvas became the mask or the face. And that was the first shot at a shaped canvas that was not a rectangular canvas.
And when was this?
Oh, I guess in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that grew in a sort of funny way. I found someone here who could do those same canvases but bigger and smaller and with different sizing and different surface and so forth, because what they were set up for was oil paint, and I was moving into acrylics. And the results were, let's say, the subjects that I was working into circular forms it was very tempting to get three-dimensional, or a little bit three-dimensional. One of the first was called Black Hole. I no longer own it. Right after that came Ocean, which included something like a wave, as you might imagine it perceived by a surfer.
Oh.
But
in the curl?
Simply with a big dark blue area that tapered back into the canvas with the crown of the wave defining it on the outside. And this notion of information of significance coming from within the canvas had meaning for me. I wasn't calling it sculpture. I wasn't doing it as a stylistic thing. I don't care about that. But I did care about content. And I cared about content coming from whatever devices I needed to use, but preferring that the works be simple, reducing it to an essence, so to speak, which is true abstraction, getting rid of the irrelevant stuff.
Well, your work called Tsunami
Yeah.
is on display at the San Francisco Museum of Craft Plus
Yes,
Design.
yes.
A wonderful show, still going on. And when I saw that, I'd never seen any work like that before, and it took my breath away. I mean, the way it conveyed this power
in a
simple way.
Yeah, in a very, very simple way, very abstract way, very essential way. Essence is, I think, what's important here. It's getting to the guts of something and allowing some of the less important surface stuff fall by the wayside. So there is also a certain ambiguity. People will say to me, don't name your pictures because it forces me to see them the way you see them. And I say, you can see them any damn way you want to see them, but you should know where I'm coming from. And so the name Tsunami is obviously right for that. The name Hope, another painting in that exhibition, comes from the Hope Diamond. And
Yes.
a very specific photograph of it, actually, if you were to check it out, though by the time I got through it, that doesn't show. And of course, it's monumental in size.
And that shows the hope basically coming through the diamond from the inside.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
All that iridescence of bits of color. And it's put together with a number of small forms. I have some limitations now, hand issues, other health issues. So it's easier for me to work with small pieces than with great big ones. And they're not too heavy for me. So I came up with, in a way of expanding my concerns with content and with aesthetics that I could manage physically. And that's an example of that.
do other people do this? I'm
Not
naive
that
in
I
art,
know,
but
not that I know of. Not that I
okay,
know
because
of.
I had never seen it before. Well, I think this is an amazing piece of art right here. Could you just tell us a little bit of your
We
inspiration
all know
for
what
this?
9/11 was.
The name of this that you call it is
Praying mantis, praying. Okay,
Yes.
now Preying, mantis, praying, Praying. Okay, using prayer as a rationale for murder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's a predator who finds his support intellectually, emotionally, from an association with an emotional with a religious doctrine.
And the emotional shock to the nation on 9/11
Yeah.
was your inspiration.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can't walk away from stuff like that, and I'm glad I have a way of working that can address these things. Because if I were simply into style, as you sometimes
Yes.
think I am, or others are, maybe others are, I don't know that I am. There's a sense here of style that is a personal way of working, if that's what you mean by it. But for me, the fact that I could take on something this serious and take it on critically and take it on philosophically, but also play wonderful games with a sea otter,
Yes.
or an egg hunt. I need to know that my way of working is not so stylistic that it tells me no about something I feel deeply and want to say. It has to be there in support of that.
Well, you did this because when you look at this, there is a sense of trepidation and of evil. I mean, you can sense being an insect in the vicinity of
it's
this
also
fellow.
ominous in another way, and that is this head up top looking down.
Yes.
Because that is a fundamental abstract device. I don't care if it's a priest, a daddy, a cop, a genie, whatever or a cobra, which I
Yes.
of course do address.
Yes.
If the head is bigger than something else on the body and looks down at you, it's threatening. And this is threatening in composition.
So when did you do this?
Even for somebody as tall as you.
Yes.
When did I do it? Very soon, within weeks, maybe not even that long, of 9/11.
Well, do you work? I mean, I can't see that you could do this rapidly, but do you work fairly fast?
If I'm freed of other obligations, I also teach, obviously, I design, I do a lot of things. But I don't remember this one piece in that sense, but I think I was on a roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
There was an urgency about it for me.
Now, the standing ovation, which I will show a picture of this that I have, of the work that you did, is in the show. Can you say a few words about that? It's quite an uplifting piece.
Yeah, well, one of the things I discovered in working the fine lines that I do, and I draw them with a ruling pen, which is an engineer's as well as an artist's instrument, as well as an architect's instrument, I discovered that by controlling the exact relationship between a series of parallel lines and a second series of parallel lines, it isn't quite the same as the first. And by changing the angle of interaction, I get this secondary vibrant imagery. There are no omissions here, but it looks like there are. And some of the paintings are stronger in that respect. It gets very, very strong here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
it's called Moray. And in Standing Ovation, Moray is entirely about sound. It's about applause. Okay, and it vibrates and just pours from the top to the bottom of the composition in response, presumably.
And it has such warm colors, your yellows and reds.
Oh yeah, it's about enthusiasm. It's about passions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
One thing about being an old geezer is I really try not to let myself do old geezer paintings. There are no black Goyas in me, and as a non-historian, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But late in Goya's life, and more recently attributed to his son, there's a series of very disturbing paintings. And like Saturn eating his son and so forth, and the witch's Sabbath. But that some way it was easy, I think, for a lot of historians. I don't know whether it's accurate or not. I can understand historians and non-historians looking at that stuff and feeling that it's an old man's attitude. And
Well,
I'm on the other side of the fence.
I have the same feeling that you're talking about. I actually wrote this down. I said, you've been teaching and creating for 60 years with a perpetually youthful spirit.
Yeah.
And your students were extremely fortunate. And I love that about it. While we're talking about this, this career of 60 years, you started teaching at Stanford in 1949, and you're still active. And you must have a lot of students
I have had
that
a
are
lot of
out in the
students.
world doing their things.
Oh, yeah,
You
yeah,
keep
yeah,
up with
yeah.
them?
Well, one of the things that was done at this little show that you've been witnessing is they had a few of these people come and give verbal and visual evidence of how I launched their careers, which was very exciting for me to experience, even though it was embarrassing. And they're just wonderful ways in which they took by assignments and showed the manifestation of these assignments and their content, their purpose, in work that they were doing. And, said simply it wouldn't have happened if this exposure had not taken place. So that was
That's the ultimate compliment.
Yeah.
Well, who are some of these people?
Who are some of these
I
people?
mean, do we know them? Do we know their work?
Oh yeah, we know their work. You certainly know the work, or you don't know you know the work, but because you're an engineer, not an architect. Michael Duncan, naming anything to you?
No.
Well, he is the controlling designer for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which is an architectural firm, and he's in the San Francisco office.
Oh.
And he has generated some of the most amazingly inventive and unconventional structures, and goes beyond structure using light and color and what have you to produce marvelously expressive works that are not, what should I say, decorative in their turning their backs on engineering, but rather do it through engineering. And much of the work he's done that's so spectacular is in China.
Oh.
Recent work.
Oh, for buildings.
Yes.
High-rise buildings and.
Yes, mostly, although some of them are not high-rise. It does wonderful things with light and color within them.
One of the things that I thought was truly amazing in your show, as was my first introduction to you, was the breadth. You work in wood and metal and textiles and designs.
That's been a burden. Oh yeah, I had a significant gallery owner in New York tell me that when I had one thing to say, she'd give me a show.
Well, you're a free spirit, so.
I mean, I can't do that. Now, if she saw what I'm doing now, I think she would buy it as one thing to say, as she meant it. Something where you look at the work and you would immediately know who did it by how it looks.
Oh yeah.
You know.
There's just even a value.
It took forever me to get to a point, and I was accused of being all over the map. That was another favorite.
Well, I think that's a Renaissance concept. That's good for you.
Absolutely.
What did you continue to work in these various media all your life, or was there periods that you would go through different things?
It was patchy, and that was circumstantial. I had to have access to certain kinds of shop equipment to do the things I wanted to do in jewelry. And you saw there's quite a bit of jewelry in the show, and of course there's much more jewelry that isn't. But it didn't roll along at an even pace where in a particular week there was a certain percentage of jewelry and a certain percentage of textile design and a certain percentage of illustration and a certain percentage of painting and or sculpture.
Well, the sense of humor is what I love, and a lot of your African animal designs, they're just really fun.
I did a lot with animals, and much of it does have humor, but it is almost self-consciously concerned with not picking up on Disney cliches
Mm-hmm.
and on long
Oh, yeah.
eyelashes and great staring
Oh,
eyes,
yes.
and I don't do it that way. I don't contribute anything to anybody in the name of making statements for them in their language, lest I be misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
They should use their language, not me.
Now your family, Leda, excuse me, was a artistic and a designer.
Extremely so. She was a weaver.
Yes, and when a family where art is and design is a focus for the whole family, did that help your own creativity?
Oh yes, it's an interactive thing. She helped me, I helped her, and the kids were very important in the whole process.
Yeah.
She used to come in here and look at these and say, it was better before.
Matt, you got to know Joe Eichler pretty well because you worked for him and with him for actually 10 years at least.
Yes.
What can you tell us about Joe as a person? I mean, I look at him and admire him for, I think, a style and qualities, but what can you say about Joe as a person?
He's a very complicated person, not a simple man. I don't know, the people who worked for him, I thought saw him as something of a driver. He saw himself much more as a liberal. His associations with labor issues, let us say, were more philosophical than his association with working people. He had a good sense of humor, a lot of sense of personal style, loved color, especially in that context, like clothes. Was perhaps more involved in and interested in what we might do in a model because he himself was interested in the components of this.
What do you mean components?
Textiles, furniture, accessories.
Of the interior decoration.
Yeah. Interior design, please. Well, decorating's fine. I just don't. Decorating for me has a sense of real impermanence. It's something you do to Christmas trees,
Mm-hmm.
And it should go as it should come. The design, even though it certainly was a transitory thing to do a model home, implicitly related to things of more lasting value. I'm very concerned with that. More about Joe Eichler.
He was very courageous, it seems to me.
I think he was.
To go out and do these contemporary homes which were non-conventional.
Yeah, I think he was courageous, but I think also he took small and careful steps into the almost monumental achievement. Maybe not almost. Monumental achievement of his life. What became his life's work, a retired man. Changing completely. He was absolutely in the dairy products business and had retired, and as I understand it, it was that money that he was using to reinvest in small subdivisions that were conventional at first.
Yes. Yeah, like in Sunnyvale, I think he did one.
You're asking for me to remember things that I may remember inaccurately, so I don't want to tell you that any of this is fact.
Mm-hmm.
But is my perception of what was going on.
Well, he was very courageous also in a liberal way, I suppose, is what we would call it, in terms of the CC&Rs of the day.
Oh, yeah.
Blocking the black people from moving into a neighborhood in this area. It wasn't like in the South, it was in this area, around the Bay Area.
Right, it certainly was. He was shocked at one point when he got some negative mail from people who told him to lay off his political attempts to influence them politically. It may have been during the Hubert Humphrey campaign or something that he circularized and tried to get people to accept his views. He saw what he was doing in housing to be something that only people of a very liberal leaning would be interested in, and was shocked to discover that once they became good buys. They were appealing to a lot of people with a very different economic orientation in our culture.
Yes. For the sake of the viewer, we are living in an Eichler here.
Yeah.
It was built for you by Joe. Built a number of Eichlers in this Stanford.
Eichler Homes did. You used the word Joe. Soon after his stay in the Army, Ned Eichler, his younger son, became a very significant component in the way the company worked.
Mm-hmm.
And Ned and Joe did not agree on everything.
Well, all fathers and sons. Your challenge as a interior design, how did you start doing that?
Well, remember, I'm a product of Cranbrook, and I did no interior design at Cranbrook. I don't know that I could, but the components of interior design, the fabrics,
mm-hmm.
the furniture, the lighting, all of these things were being explored by different people at Cranbrook, and we worked not necessarily collaboratively, but as a community.
This was the school you went to before you came to Stanford?
Yes.
Because you were still quite young when you started working with Joe.
Yeah, I was very young. I was too young, but I did it.
Mm-hmm.
You see, if I came to Stanford and I was 21, and I was at Cranbrook for 3 years before that.
Well, one of the problems was a little bit of having people understand how their life might be in this non-traditional environment.
Well, and in that sense, the models became instructive, almost educational, and having, as I did, access to university faculty, especially in the art department, I was able to get a little series of presentations. They were bigger than seminars. They were sort of small speeches in an evening now and then of some person who had strong convictions regarding design, contemporary design, where we were going and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And these were mainly aimed at the people who, I guess the nucleus was the sales force, so that they would be more sophisticated. I mean, Joe had a brother named Al, and he said, we don't care if a tap dancer buys one of our houses. So it wasn't a universal thing that everybody that had access to this phenomenon understood it and moved it in the direction in which it seemed to be born to be moved into.
I would think that Joe started off in the most perfect area for his business. For one thing, of course, the times were right. People were coming back. They needed housing, so developed housing and subdivisions were really required. But also, there's a lot of technical engineers, art people in the area, and I was an engineer. My first house was an Eichler. I bought it in 1964 in Sunnyvale. I see that an awful lot of people who live in Eichlers are in the technology field. Design, engineering, things like that. They appreciate it.
They're the ones you notice and identify with. I would say that there's a full spread of professional and cultural orientations of people in Eichler Homes. And that if there's something that's truer of them than of other houses, since the Eichlers are unconventional in many respects, people who are comfortable with that, or better still, inspired by it,
mm-hmm.
are likely to gravitate toward Eichler Homes. So you expect the communities to be what I will loosely call more progressive.
Mm-hmm. Now, the genesis or the inspiration for the designs that Robert Anshin and other architects, Claude Oakley, etc., was traced back to Frank Lloyd Wright in general, in terms of people talking about it. You had a story that I heard from a talk that you gave on the Eichler thing where they were celebrating the historic naming of some of the neighborhoods in Palo Alto. And in this story you talked about Joe taking Frank Lloyd Wright around the corner to see a subdivision of his that he wanted to show Frank, and you had some comments that Joe was...
They may have been to lunch. There was another story about who paid for that lunch, but then it was time for Joe to show Frank Lloyd Wright what he was doing. And when they became into view, able to see the subdivision, I don't know which way the car came, but Frank Lloyd Wright is said to have put his hands to his head and say, "My God, what have I done?" It's interesting that he didn't say, "My God, does anybody think I had anything to do with this?"
Yes. Yeah, he was responsible for so much in his mind. Frank Lloyd Wright and Richard Neutra. Of course, I'm the director of the Neutra house that we've saved in Los Altos, and that's one of the uses we're interviewing you for, of course. But Frank Lloyd Wright and Richard Neutra had some common thinking about somewhat tyrannical control of the houses that they designed and how the people should live in them. And you had some comments also about these styles and how you tried to show that such styles were not required or not.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to respond to that. I think inadvertently, an Eichler home, because of its simplicity and because of the structural uniformity of them, was an enticing opportunity to go beyond one way or another for the user to go beyond the inherited structure one way or another, to assert himself, herself, the family, whatever the case might be. In other words, they could almost be perceived as unfinished. I could imagine that Wright would have felt that way about them, and that it became our responsibility to finish them. I don't mean mine and Lead as doing the model, though in a way our models were to stimulate people to take a hand in them, and also not to do certain things. If you respected the fundamental structure, if empty, it was still a work of integrity and clarity. It didn't make sense to try to treat the interior of the house as if it were utterly other and you wished you didn't have it and did have the conventional alternative. So the little winding path up to the front door that somebody liked because they'd had it in New England doesn't really make much sense. On the other hand, we did want them to understand, or people to understand, that other works and other times and other materials and other cultures that are done with this genuineness, with this integrity work, and this can be textiles, it can be furniture, certainly some of the early American things, wooden, oaken things.
Well,
we're very happy.
That's a question context. I have. Is do you feel as a design person that these modern houses, the contemporary home designs, are comfortable with modern art, certainly in them, but also comfortable with almost any kind of art?
Absolutely. And my peeve with propagandists for Eichler Homes in organized ways, much of this coming out of the North Bay, is that the idea of something being right for an Eichler home tends to be equated with it being something that resembles an Eichler home.
Ah, yes, okay.
Okay. And that, so some of the articles I see that pushed people to buy prints or paintings to hang on the wall that were geometric and angular because the houses were geometric and angular, you know? And so they would advise us, these written works, you know, to emulate the look rather than to understand the independence and the responsibility to be free and inventive and personal in what they would do. So it seemed counterproductive. And, you know, I mean, I can remember Charles Eames once saying that our cheapest and most valuable material is space. And that certainly is true for the house in a way. You know, it's the spaces. When you buy a house, you don't look at the walls, you look at the spaces. You know, and so somebody will come along and say, it gets printed. You know, negative space is very important when you're deciding how to hang pictures on the wall. And I understand the term, But I don't think there's such a thing as negative space. I think it's all positive space. And you use it with respect for itself, not simply as an interim neutrality between things that interest you. So I kept encountering comments from what I would call the updated Eichler world that were in fundamental contradiction to the inventiveness, to the philosophical content, to the chutzpah, Yiddish word meaning nerve, of an Eichler home.
Well, it's fun to have surprises, I think. Otherwise, it's boring.
Well, the surprise, like we've been doing design shows at Stanford, and one of them featured surprise. I'm very into surprise.
Mm-hmm.
I use some rather unexpected stories for a professor to tell students, because I think in humor you discover when you get a punchline you don't expect the utter power of surprise. And I think that should also be true in the design process, and it tends to be left out. And predictability is something that the marketplace would seem to require of design. I mean, I've heard of a person who was quoted as saying designers are not trustworthy. You ask 5 designers the same question, you get 5 different answers. Well, I say yippee, to that.
Well, and I'm an engineer, and the concept of engineer bandwidth is that the more surprise there is available within the content, the more bandwidth is required, and the more valuable it is.
Well, something I use in teaching, and I certainly use it in my own work, is a preference for, come on, Matt. I had it in my mind and I just lost it. Just give me a second. You can edit this out, this pause, but I just got to get it back. It's funny how that happens, isn't it?
Come back to it, and I'll give you another topic. When you were mentioning an empty house, in my mind, there's nothing more beautiful than an Eichler home that's completely empty, but all of the landscaping is done. Because in fact, when you landscape the outside, you decorate the inside.
Oh, in many ways, yes. Many ways, yes. I can remember doing a ceiling for a big model for Eichler Homes and painting it slightly pink because I knew that the grass outside, it had an extensive lawn, would reflect green when there was sun on it and neutralize the ceiling.
Yes. That's great.
It worked.
Well, I think the designers, Frank Lloyd Wright and certainly Richard Neutra, and they both studied Japanese architecture. I mean, the Japanese was a central theme in a lot of the development of the contemporary architecture and the gardens and how you bring the indoors and the outdoors together. And that's certainly a characteristic of our little Neutra house that we saved in Los Altos.
The phrase is constructive disobedience.
That's great.
Constructive disobedience.
That's great. Positive surprise.
Yeah, that's I ask my students to do that from the beginning. They have assignments, so there's something to disobey. But the disobedience should get us deeper into the motive for the assignment and not take us on a vacation away from it.
Well, I mean, that is the essence of creativity, that you have to have the courage to trust yourself and do your own things, do something different. You're not married to conventions.
No,
you
absolutely
can break
not.
out.
And that's sure sometimes it happens in spite of not having the courage. You just can't help it because circumstances lead you to it. I mean, I'm not sure what I'd have done if there wasn't a period of my life when Eichler Homes could be the vehicle for that. I refer to it in that little thing I had you read as a kind of a designer Camelot.
Yes, can we talk about that a little bit? I have it, but can you kind of go over some of the points that you were making in that paper?
Do you have it with you?
Yes, I do.
Because I need glasses. There may be some I can probably manage without them. Okay. Let's see, the foregoing would open the door to a brief discussion of my own designer role as a propagandist. This is in the
For
context of
Joe, for the
yes,
Eichler
this is
Homes.
in the context of one of 6 lectures, and this one is on propaganda.
That you
All
give?
kinds of propaganda that I give to students in design. A company of merchant home builders, Eichler Homes was distinguished from its competitors by retaining architects to design its houses. The presentation and promotion of its radical product were greatly handicapped by conventional advertising and modeling methods that simply didn't fit or work. Model homes, for example, the major pieces in the promotional puzzle, had been grudgingly left to furniture retailers who had their own, often tawdry, products to push, and in doing so, pushed an Eichler interior completely out of shape. Eichler Homes bit the bullet and decided to purchase rather than borrow, and so control its own appropriate furnishings, and hired me with Matt Kahn, my wife, to select, coordinate, install, and detail its model elements, bringing the house to life by working with rather than against their space and structure. Our installations were somewhere between sensible and idealistic, answering questions and dispelling doubts as to what living in such a home might really be like. We held the view that the simplicity and structural uniformity of these houses inspired experiment and variety rather than obedience and predictability. There it is.
There it is.
Drawing the line only at kitsch and imitation. We included objects that were both old and new, exotic and domestic, severe and cushy. The customer could not and would not be advised to start from scratch and go modern. We found the components everywhere. There was no one source that could guarantee taste. I might add to that we read the things for sale ads in newspapers that people, moving just advertised that they had this or that for sale. For about a decade, we were a part of this designer Camelot, designing brochures, signs, and ads as well as showrooms, promoting a product we believed in. Vivid in my memory are the special presentations advertised in the Sunday supplement. Then the cheeses and salamis hung in the kitchens, live flowers took to the tables, live art graced the walls, and children rode carousel horses mounted in the garden.
That's great. Thank you very much.
So, simplicity then is a benevolent container rather than an absolute austere authoritative statement against doing anything.
Let me change the subject just a little bit now. With the Richard Neutra designed houses in Los Altos, one of the clients was Jacqueline Johnson. She was a graduate student at Stanford studying English, writing a dissertation on Ben Jonson. And then she married a surrealist painter who then evolved into abstract painting, and you know of him, Gordon Oslo Ford. Mm-hmm. She was friends with Robert Motherwell and Roberta Mata. Mm-hmm. And Wolfgang Palin was one of their friends, and they were doing work on the surrealism, and they actually converted kind of away from that and did other things. This was in the time when they returned to the Bay Area in 1947, and they lived in the Bay Area for the rest of their lives. They were part of the art scene. Did you have any contact with any of these people, or have any?
Not really, but I have some strong views about the surrealists.
Mm-hmm.
One is, I'll be eternally grateful for the way in which they opened up, let's say, American public awareness of the immense power and quality of Native American art.
Native American, yes.
And I am a collector of Native American art. And when I can't afford it, I try to make things that express the same excitement that I feel in them. Surrealism per se, and it is interesting that you note that they moved away from it, tends not to really deal with a very strong statement from the form, but rather a very, let's say, fascinating but very traditional rendering of a dream concern or a fantasy of some sort.
Yes.
Dali's molded, melted clocks, of course, are too easy an example of this kind of thing.
Can I just stop you just for a minute and move you just forward a little bit? The sunlight is hitting your hair and causing a sparkle that we're not really interested in. Okay, carry on.
Anyway, where were we? Surrealism.
The Native American art and how they...
Yeah, well, they did uncover and were excited by this kind of material. But the problem I felt and feel in terms of Eichler Homes on the one hand, but even more importantly, significant people like Richard Neutra, is that they are less concerned with what something is than what it's of. And what it's of is usually a kind of dream fantasy that, though it is fantasy, it is nonetheless utterly realistic and illustrated in classical terms.
Do you enjoy some of these artists' work?
Very little.
Very little.
Yeah. I can respect it as a skill trip.
Mm-hmm.
And as a tremendous ego trip. Well, of course, on the part of some of them, not others. You mentioned Mata, I think.
Yes.
He's one.
He was an architect
at
one time, and he quit. He studied with Corbusier.
Yeah, he's someone who I would in my little academy in my head, I would accept, because though his things considered to have that three-dimensional polished surface, modeled deep space atmosphere in a tradition that is really Renaissance, he nonetheless did this with a high level of inventiveness in the form itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't what it was of, it was what it was that mattered.
Now your work, we, because of history, have this desire to kind of connect Jacqueline Johnson's further life in modern art with the Neutra house that we have. But when I look at your work, it is kind of startling in that it looks like your artwork has clean lines and a brevity of statement, but power, a lot of power. And it looks like you could have been an architect. You know, the mixing of art and design, because design is a strong element of everything you do.
Architects played an important part in my design education. About everybody who was a teacher of design, and when I was at Cranbrook, was an architect.
Oh.
Yeah. So I couldn't help but rub off.
Mm-hmm.
And structure is important to me. And how else should I put it? I think I arrived at a very curious mixture of line and sprayed speckled surface. And the speckled surface, if you want to think of it that way, is what a cross-section of a bunch of lines would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And by having this control of two elastic conditions in the painting, the sprayed surfaces and the constant play of parallel lines, and could make these interact, I could take highly disciplined structural devices and wind up with poetry. Because when they come together, then they deal with tonality. I can deal with mystery, I can deal with surprise, I can deal with all of these fascinations that are not the typical fare of someone who trades on objectivity and severity.
Matt, could you tell us what this is?
It's a painting.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, yes, thank you. You make it like, sort of a joke. Well, almost everybody who asks that question doesn't start with the fact that it's a creative, structured piece that somebody made. They mean, what is it a picture of? And in this case, it is certainly a response to real circumstances, mm-hmm. but it's not, in the conventional sense, a picture of those circumstances. Now, the thing that fascinated me here was the play between the severity of steel structure, as in the Golden Gate Bridge, and, it sounds funny, the mystery of mist, the way in which the mists swirl and melt into, mellow, control, expand upon the steel structure.
And a fixed bridge never changes hardly, but the surroundings
everything around
change
it does.
by the minute.
And of course, it looks out to the Golden Gate, and so there is a pocket in the painting where you don't see the paint, the golden paint, but the painting itself does. And so that was right here. There's
It glows.
a reflection from this surface onto this surface. So we really have three things at work. You know, the backing up, the late afternoon sunlight, the severity of the unyielding bridge, and the melting and mixing and teasing quality of the mists.
Well, this is beautiful, and you said you just sold it recently, so we're lucky to have it here.
That's why it's out.
Yes, that's great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Matt.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
And this has been a lot of fun. So we'll quit here then. Thank you.
Okay.
That's fabulous.
That's stupendo.
That's just fabulous, Matt.